my name is Catherine Sanders. I'm a human factors and work systems engineer, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I was doing faculty development for the first 11, 13 years of my career. And that's why I have such a deep appreciation for faculty development. I founded and led a faculty development center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we looked at faculty work through the lenses of teaching and learning, as well as the lens of research, and specifically transdisciplinary research, as well as looking at people's work-life balance and the things that brought them health and well-being. So I have some background in faculty development, but perhaps a unique twist on it, given my background in human factors and work systems engineering. In my consulting practice, I help organizations improve the engagement of their people, as well as their people's health and sustainable productivity. So I'd like to bring that lens into a discussion about faculty development to talk about increasing faculty engagement. So I want to start a little bit about talking about engagement, what it is, and how it relates to motivation. And then I want to use a couple classic models that I think of and I teach my clients all the time about how to improve work so that people can engage more. And then I want to talk a little bit about how faculty development can use these models more specifically. So let's talk a little bit about engagement itself, what that construct means. It is a little fuzzy. It came up in the 1990s. It means having some sort of emotional commitment or enthusiasm about your organization. And it's usually sort of a mashup of motivation to do work and loyalty to stay. And I think most organizations, when they say engagement, they also want performance. Engagement itself is kind of rough to wrap your hands around. So I want to be more specific and talk about models and theories about employee motivation at work. And then we can build toward this larger construct of engagement. I want to start at the start and talk about Hertzberg. Frederick Hertzberg published his motivation hygiene theory back in 1968. So it's been a while, and it was a groundbreaking theory and backed up by research. So the premise of it, which is, it seems to a large extent been forgotten, is that there are two groups of kind of job design factors, the way work is designed, that affect people. So there's motivation, things that motivate people, and there are things that, if they're not taken care of, can dissatisfy people. And this is super important because it means that there's actually two scales going on. So we can have someone who is highly motivated and yet also highly dissatisfied. And we're going to come to that in a moment when we talk about the specifics. So just keep in your mind that there's a number of things going on here. So when Hertzberg did his research, he found that there are some things that, when they're present in a job, can lead people to be highly motivated to perform in that job. And that there are some things that, when they're messed up or absent in a job, can lead people to be dissatisfied. Let's talk about the things that can lead to dissatisfaction. So Hertzberg called these hygiene factors. So they're either taken care of, like good hygiene, and they lead to zero dissatisfaction, or they're not taken care of and people are dissatisfied because of them. So for instance, policies and practices can lead to dissatisfaction. I disagree with the way this is happening. I disagree with these rules. I'm dissatisfied with these rules. Working conditions can be dissatisfiers. The best we can hope for is that if we take care of working conditions so that they're good, people have a lack of dissatisfaction. So the dissatisfaction goes to zero. I am not dissatisfied, right? That's not the same as being motivated. That just means I lack dissatisfaction. Same with salary and benefits. If they're not the way I want them to be, I'm dissatisfied with them. But improving them only can bring me to a lack of dissatisfaction. This is revolutionary when you think about it, even though it took place in 1968, as most organizations think that money is a motivator. Really, money is something that's quite complicated to think about because it impacts a number of different factors. So salary and benefits, you're either lack of dissatisfaction or you're dissatisfied, but it doesn't have anything to do with performance on the job. Status in the organization, how others see you, job security, whether or not you get along with your supervisor and how you feel about your supervising experience, how you're supervised, your own personal life, your coworkers. These are all things that can either lead to dissatisfaction or zero dissatisfaction. What Hertzberg found, though, is that there are certain parts of work that can create a situation where people feel motivated. For instance, if they're recognized for their good work, if they feel that they can grow in meaningful ways, that's motivating. If they feel they can achieve something, that's motivating. If they feel they can make some sort of advancement, if they can feel challenged in their job, they feel that their job is using their skills and abilities, they feel a sense of responsibility. These are things that lead to motivation and thus potentially to high performance and engagement. So let's step back and think about this. Medicine is one of those places where this model resonates hugely, right? So I'm going to go back to the hygiene factors for a moment. When I first started as a consultant, I was working with a number of primary care physicians and, in fact, the State Medical Society. And I sat in one meeting where the primary care physicians were talking about how dissatisfied they were with their salaries. They all made somewhere in the $200,000 range. And I kind of thought, given the research, that might be a pretty good salary. It's more than a PhD engineer has made to date. And it's certainly more than you need to live a great life in Madison, Wisconsin. So this salary and benefit conversation that they were dissatisfied about was puzzling to me. And the more I heard them talk about it, the more I heard them talk about their status. They were dissatisfied because many of their colleagues who were in different specialties, particularly orthopedic surgery or cardiac surgery or neurology, were making a lot more money than them, sometimes 2 to 3 times more money than them. So the salary, the amount of money itself wasn't actually the issue. It was the status that was the issue. And all of these things contributed to a feeling of dissatisfaction. I've heard people complain about, these are people who make 6 figures, complain about parking, where their parking assignment is. All of these things can lead to dissatisfaction. And the best you can hope for, if you solve it and pay everybody what they want to be paid or what they think they should be paid, is that you can create zero dissatisfaction. And sometimes that's worthwhile, especially if people actually have needs for salary to support their life. So meaning they're making less money than they need to make in order to pay their bills, right? So this dissatisfaction, it's real, it's important, and it's not everything. Now let's look at the motivators. So in medicine, the motivators are usually quite strong. There's a sense of achievement. There's a sense of responsibility. Many of these people, most all of them that I've ever worked with, love their patients and are so dedicated to their patients' well-being and growth. And they want their patients to get the best care possible. They feel challenged in their jobs just by practicing medicine, by working with patients. They see advancement. They feel recognized at least by their patients, if not by their system that they work for. And they feel a sense of growth, that they're always trying to be a better physician, that they're always finding out new ways to help their patients. So they're highly motivated. And at the same time, many of them are highly dissatisfied. When we look at the two scales together, highly motivated and highly dissatisfied, it's a little bit deceiving the way that I've got it drawn here, because it looks like it's all on one scale, but these are actually two different scales. And what I would say is, instead of going to 0, if you're highly motivated and yet you're highly dissatisfied, I would think of these things as just out of balance. So essentially it says this system or this tension is extreme and we don't know what this person's going to do. They might be at high risk of quitting. We do know that if there's low motivation, low intrinsic motivation, the number of job characteristics pointing toward motivation is low. So if we take away some of the meaningfulness of the work, then we still have a lot of dissatisfaction, that it's more likely that people might think about quitting. And in fact, we have a lot of people leaving medicine now. So the dissatisfaction has overtaken the things that are the calling to be a healer. It's useful to go a step further now and look at the researchers who come immediately after Hertzberg. They take Hertzberg's motivators and they go further, they go deeper. So we're no longer talking about the dissatisfiers now. We're talking about more depth of understanding of what are the things that make work motivating for people. What are the things that make a job worth engaging? And so Hackman and Oldham in 1976 come after Hertzberg and they start to study these motivators. And here's what they come up with: job characteristics theory. I use job characteristics theory in my consulting projects to analyze jobs. So I look at skill variety, task identity, task significance, that all lead to meaningfulness of the work. I look at the levels of autonomy that people have that result in their feeling of responsibility for what they're doing. And I look at the feedback people are getting and the knowledge of results they have about their impact. So let's take them each individually here. Skill variety is exactly what it sounds like. It's the number of your skills you get to use on a regular basis at work. So it's being able to express more of your abilities and skills in order to do your regular job. Task identity is doing something that's identifiable, right? From the beginning to the end. If I worked on an assembly line and I put screw A into slot D, that has low task identity. If I say I'm building an engine and I'm doing multiple parts of this, that has more identity. So identity has to do with how well I can do something that has some sort of beginning and an end. I can see some sort of completion with it. Task significance means it's sort of like the cocktail conversation you have. What's one of the things that people first ask you? They ask you your name, and then they ask you, what do you do? So task significance has to do with how important society or our organization feels our role is. So if I say I'm a pediatric surgeon, that might get one set of reactions. If I say I work in a bakery, that might get another set of reactions. Or if I say I'm a stay-at-home parent, that might get a different set of reactions. So task significance and task identity, doing something from the beginning to the end, seeing an identifiable outcome, and skill variety, using most of my skills, they all impact how meaningful I see my job as. And this is a feeder into motivation. Another contributor to motivation is autonomy. And this isn't just flexibility about where I work from. There's been a lot of conversation about remote work and being able to choose where I work from, if that's viable for what I do, is a type of autonomy. But there are lots of different types of autonomy. There's opportunity to help people choose what they do, when they do it, who they do it with, the amount of time they have to do it, the resources that they have to do their work with. And so autonomy has to do a lot with how I'm able to create a situation where I feel responsible for the work that I do. I don't feel helpless. I don't feel controlled. I feel like I'm responsible for this and I'll figure out how to do it. And I have the resources I need in order to do it well in the time I have. So that's motivational. And then lastly, feedback. And this is perhaps the most misunderstood. This kind of feedback, the feedback that leads to motivation, isn't about feedback from a supervisor, and it's not delayed. That comes months or weeks or years after I've done it. In order to be motivational, feedback has to be specific. It has to be timely, meaning nearly immediate. It has to be constructive. And most importantly, it has to be from the people who are experiencing the work product. Meaning, if I'm working on an assembly line, my feedback might come from the group that's dependent on whatever it is I'm producing to do their work. If we bring it into the classroom, this would be feedback from my students if I'm teaching, and it would be timely, not at the end of the semester. It would be constructive, not vague. It would be specific. It would help me change what I'm doing in order to get a better outcome for everybody. When I look at the core job characteristics that people need in order to engage, and then I come back to think about faculty development, it gives me some things to imagine, right? I can imagine that in order to engage people, I'm going to have to figure out how to increase the amount of variety in the part of their jobs that I'm interested in, how to increase the task identity, so how to see the end product of something, and how to talk about its significance so that people know that it matters, right? I also want to give people more autonomy. I don't want to tell people to do things the same way, because that isn't going to increase autonomy. In fact, it's going to be a demotivator. I want to give people like a menu of choices about how and what and when to do things. And then if I can, I want to improve feedback so that it actually can feed motivation as opposed to just kind of sit there at the end in a meaningless state, and if anything, cause people to be demoralized by hearing too late that they did something that wasn't appreciated and wasn't helpful, and now they can't fix it. In summary, if we want to increase faculty engagement through faculty development, we have to focus on these motivators, these job characteristics when we design initiatives. We can't ignore the dissatisfiers because they're real and they affect people. But if we remove the motivators and we only have dissatisfiers, then we know we're not going to get better engagement. We have to try to address the dissatisfiers in whatever ways we can. But even if we do address them, we can't expect them to improve engagement. Because engagement, again, is this mashup of motivation, loyalty, and performance. And so engagement is a derivative of motivation. And if we're not increasing motivation, then we can't expect that we're going to be increasing engagement. There are certain parts of faculty work where we can improve things that are currently demotivating. We can do better at giving people feedback, right? Again, specific, immediate, constructive feedback from the people being impacted. So from students, of course, from advisees, from colleagues, from direct reports, right? We can have that kind of culture of feedback and make it normal, as opposed to using performance appraisals and student evaluations, which generally have a demotivating impact. Although it might seem odd Faculty work can also suffer from a lack of variety. Sometimes people feel locked into teaching the same classes over time. They might be the only expert in that area, or they might be the only person willing to teach a particular class that's required. And so boredom can set in, lack of skill variety. I do the same thing all the time, and it never seems to change. Research can also have that effect. When we're hired to be in a particular research area in a particular research institution, and we're hired for our expertise in a very small, specific area. Well, over time, my area might start to interest me less. And it could be my area becomes less funded over time by external circumstances. So it's less possible for me to get grants just because of the time I'm living in. So how do we help our faculty reinvigorate their research careers? How do you help people expand to use more of their skills or use their skills in a different way? Collaboration can be part of it, research collaborations, trying to learn a new area, collaborating with people from different institutions. We could collaborate with people from industry. There's lots of things we could do if we knew that we were trying to increase skill variety. We would ask our people, what are the things that you're most wanting, and how can we help you experience them? And lastly, lack of significance, feeling like what you're doing doesn't matter, I think is a pretty common experience at a certain point in one's career, especially if you've been teaching a long period of time or doing research a long period of time. It could be that you feel that you're taken for granted, or that no one else understands what you're doing or the benefits that the organization is reaping because of what you're doing. Maybe it's that you feel you're not being appreciated for being a great advisor. We could do a better job of appreciating our people and actually expressing that. We could even change our reward structures to reward people for doing the things we want them to be doing, right? We could reevaluate the workload we're giving people and take off the things from their plate that are less important. And we could appreciate the things that they're doing that are more important. When we give people appreciation, when we give them a reasonable workload, when we give them the opportunity to get meaningful, timely, constructive feedback, and to know the impact that they're having, then we can talk about engagement. I hope this is helpful. I hope it gives you some ideas for your faculty development initiatives. And I hope that your faculty find more to engage in their jobs. Take good care.